Today, we're going to do something we've never done before. In this episode of the Church Disrupted podcast, we're going to do our very first red flag review. And for those that don't know, red flag reviews are simply going to be us taking a look at churches across the United States and looking at their websites, looking at social media, looking at their public-facing persona to ask the question, are they safe churches? Or a better question, do they look like they would be safe churches, especially for someone who has been through spiritual abuse or deep church hurt? And because here's what we know. If you've been through spiritual abuse or deep church hurt, then going back to church can be a really terrifying proposition. But many of the people that we talk to in our audience and our community, you would say, Jeff, we still love Jesus. I still love Jesus. I want to be a part of the church, but I'm scared to death to get hurt again. I'm scared to experience more religious trauma because I'm not sure what would happen if I had another bad experience. So we get questions all the time where people will say, do you guys have, does Church Disrupted, does the Spiritual Abuse Institute have recommendations for churches in my area? Now, here's the problem. We have listeners not only just from the United States, but from countries around the world, but our U.S. listeners are from all 50 states, from all different kinds of cities and rural and suburban and urban areas all over the U.S. So it's impossible for us to have a good recommendation of a safe church for you anywhere. What we thought would help more are red flag reviews. And here's why. Because red flag reviews, in these, we want to teach you the way that we look at churches to decide, is this church safe enough? Does it appear to be safe enough to warrant a visit where I don't have to worry? Does it appear to be safe enough where I could ask some tough questions and make sure that I'm in the right spot? So that's what we want to do with these red flag reviews. We want to help you. Let's start out the very first red flag review. It's going to be a full episode of the podcast, right? But after this, many of the red flag reviews we do won't be episodes of the podcast. They'll be standalone videos on YouTube just to help you learn what to look for. So sometimes you're going to see churches in your area. That's going to be really helpful. But if it isn't a church in your area, hopefully these red flag reviews help you to learn what kind of things to look for that you can see right on a church's website or social media presence. So let's talk about, before we get started though, what are red flag reviews and what are red flag reviews not? Because it's important to know that we are starting in the same place and we agree on what they are and what they're not. So let's start with this. Red flag reviews, what are they? Red flag reviews are a look at churches' websites and social media so that we can check for the most common red flags that we tend to see in unhealthy and abusive churches. So we're not just pulling these red flags out of nowhere. These aren't just our opinions. The red flags we talk about are red flags that have been involved. They have been there. They have been present in almost every spiritual abuse case that we've seen, both the public national scandals and the churches that we've been messaged about behind the scenes that nobody ever heard about in the news. So again, some of these may feel like they're a little bit much to you, but they're not our opinions. They're not your opinions. They are red flags that have been present in abuse cases. So we want to make sure that we talk about them. What else are red flag reviews? Red flag reviews, here's how we're treating this. We're treating this as if a really close friend or family member who has been deeply hurt by the church has come to us and asked us to check out a church that they're thinking of visiting, and they've asked us to give feedback on whether we think it looks safe or not. Now, here's the deal. In all honesty, we can't say if a church is safe or not. I can't tell you if a church is safe or not. But here's what we can do. We can say whether or not we would recommend a specific church to someone with religious trauma based on the red and green flags that we see from publicly available information. Red flag reviews, They're also a great way to help you learn what to look for on the front end when you're checking out a new church, okay? We don't want this to be something where you have to just rely on finding a red flag review that we've done. We want to help you learn what to look for on your own. And over time, after seeing the red flag reviews of different churches, here's our hope. Our hope is that you can feel more comfortable knowing what to look for on your own in the future. Okay, so that's what red flag reviews are. Again, we're treating it as if a family member or friend has come to us and said, hey, does this church look safe based on your experience? Okay, here's what red flag reviews are not, and this is just as important. Okay, red flag review is not us saying that a church is healthy or not. Because the truth is, we can't tell you if a church is healthy or not just from looking at publicly available information. And healthy means different things to different people. Okay, so we're not telling you if a church is healthy or not. There may be a church that gets a poor red flag review score that we recommend that if you've been through religious trauma or spiritual abuse, we can't recommend that you attend it. Just because we can't recommend that you attend it doesn't mean it's an unhealthy church. It may be a healthy church. We're going to draw the line on the safe side of caution here because we know that if you've been through religious trauma already, it's important that the next place that you go to church isn't a really bad experience. Now, here's what red flag reviews are not as well. We are not saying that a church is safe or dangerous because we can't tell you if they're safe. We can't tell you if they're dangerous just from publicly available information. We can tell you whether or not they have red flags that have been involved in other churches that were involved in dangerous situations or had leaders who did dangerous things. Red flag reviews are not a holistic look at a church, and they're not a guarantee of any kind. A church can score really well on the red flag review and still have issues that keep you from going there, okay? And a church can score really poorly on its red flag review and be a church worth going to, okay? What we're trying to do is we're trying to teach you how to have the information to know how likely is it that this church is safe. But also, one of the things you're going to see from this is not a once and done, yes, this church is safe or not. We're going to try to teach you how to be armed from these reviews with the right questions to ask. And those questions that you ask are going to give you a lot more of an indication of whether a church is safe or dangerous, whether it's healthy or unhealthy. Now, this is a big one. Red flag reviews are not a theology review. These have nothing to do with theology. And here's the reason why. I assume that you can look through statements of faith on your own. Okay, we're not looking through statements of faith on this. We're only looking at safe culture concerns, okay? And one of the things I have found in this process, dealing with and talking with so many people who have been through significant spiritual abuse, people who are deconstructing, people who are healing from religious trauma, one thing tends to stand out. The church that you re-engage with for the first time often is not going to be a church that you align with most theologically. Because it's often when we step out of our theological frameworks where we can learn to see with fresh eyes and where we can feel safest. So this first church that you check into, it's probably not going to be the church you're at for forever. And you may not agree with everything theologically. But if it's safe, it may be a really good place for you to step into. But again, if you have theology, non-negotiables, I encourage you to look at those on your own. Here's what I'm asking you to do, okay? Don't come at us after a red flag review and go, Jeff, how can you give them a good score? How can you give them a bad score? Didn't you look at their theology? Don't you know what they believe about complementarianism or the gifts of the Spirit or this or that or the other? Okay, before you ask, we don't care, okay? And I don't mean that we don't care theologically. We deeply do. But did you know that our board and our podcast hosts come from a really differing set of theological backgrounds? We don't all agree on our own theology, okay? But this work is more important to us than specific secondary theological issues, okay? So we care personally about theology just like we know that you do, okay? But these red flag reviews, we're going to look at churches with all different kinds of theology because we have people listening with all different kinds of theology, okay? So learn what you can learn from it. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater just because we look at a church that has different theological stances than you. And please, don't come at us and try to cancel us or tell us you're going to unfollow because we did a review and gave a good score to a church you disagree with theologically, okay? A good rule of thumb, all right? And I'm not trying to be mean. We love you guys. We do this work for you. But if you think you need to threaten to unfollow us, go ahead and unfollow us. We are not for you. We don't do this work for followers. We don't do this work for likes. We don't do this work for clicks. We don't do this work for money, okay? If we did, we would have stopped doing this work a long time ago. We do this work because we want to see safe churches. We want to see healthy church leaders, and we want to see people who have been through spiritual abuse to heal, to be whole, and to be able to re-engage with their faith in a meaningful way, okay? And that brings us to the last thing that red flag reviews are not. They are not a way to dunk on people. We aren't trying to make anybody or any church look bad. We're simply looking to evaluate churches based on publicly available information, again, through the lens of someone we care about is trying to re-engage with the church, and they want to know what is the likelihood that this would be a safe place for me to re-engage. Now, you may be asking as well, you may be saying, Jeff, how do you find these red flag review candidates? And that is a fair question. We find them in a couple of different ways, okay? Because again, we're not trying to dunk on anybody. We're not going after churches, okay? One way that we get red flag review candidates is we have listeners who ask us to review certain churches. And if we have listeners who say, hey, can you look at churches in our area? We may go look for those. Sometimes listeners may say, hey, I'm thinking about checking out this specific church. Could you look at it? When we get those messages, those go into a list of potential red flag review candidates, okay? We're going to do red flag reviews on pastors and church staff who act out on social media. Everybody's not going to agree with that. Everybody's not going to like that. But if you show your tail instead of your fruit, and you act in a totally unchristian way on social media in the comments with us, and pastors in your bio or your church names in your bio, then we're going to look at those churches. And here's the reason why. It's not to get back at people. It is not to be petty. But if you have pastors or church leaders or people who are very involved in a church who are acting very unchristlike when they have the church name in their bio, it is generally a pretty good sign that there may be some unsafe practices to look at in that church. That's a red flag for me. Not one we're going to look at here, but it's one that I have noticed. So we're going to look at those. We're also going to look at large and well-known churches in each state because those are churches that people ask about often. And from time to time, when there are allegations about a church, maybe they're not proven, maybe we're not sure, or maybe there are proven allegations that come out, there's a scandal at a church. From time to time, we're going to look at those because it helps us look back and look forward. How likely is it that something's going on here, right? Because every time we have a scandal, every time we have abuse really of any kind, we can go back and you're going to notice some of these red flags in these churches. Now, one of the things that I want you to think about, we're also looking through the lens that we kind of all come from the most, okay? It's an evangelical lens. So as you want us to look at different kinds of churches, let us know as well, because we want to slowly start looking at churches outside of the evangelical model and tradition as well. So let us know if you have concerns about churches from any of those other models. But that's what red flag reviews are and what red flag reviews aren't. So here's what we're going to do today for our very first red flag review in this episode. We're going to look at two churches, okay? These two churches that we're going to look at, I was trying to think, what is the best way for us to choose the first two churches? Because no matter what we do, there are going to be people who say, hey, y'all are just going after churches, you're trying to dunk on them, you just don't like this church, okay? So the fairest way that I knew how to do this was the first two churches we're going to look at two of the churches where we have had pastors on the podcast. All right, so we're going to look at First Baptist Tifton, Georgia, with lead pastor TJ Malden. He was on the podcast a while ago. You can check out this episode with him. Both of these pastors, by the way, you're going to realize they were both critical of us. That's how we got them on the podcast. It was to talk about things we disagreed on. And because we've had them on the podcast, I've looked into their churches already. So it was pretty easy to say which 2 red flag reviews would be most helpful to our audience. So First Baptist Tifton with TJ Malden is the first church we're going to look at. And the second church we're going to look at is Daystar Church in Cullman, Alabama. All right, Daystar Church in Cullman, Alabama. And Daystar is actually pastored by Jerry Lawson. Jerry Lawson was in this episode. Again, you can check out there. That episode was definitely just, full disclosure, it was one of the toughest episodes that we have done. There was a whole lot of narcissistic responses in that episode. But again, that was something that said, hey, let me look a little deeper into this guy's church. And again, it became a really good red flag review candidate. And it's another reminder for you, outside of social media and websites and all of that, the way people act, the way people talk to other people, the fruit they show and the fruit they don't show, it can let you know a lot about the church they attend. It's not everything, because every church has people who are going to be unfruitful, people who are going to be mean, and every church has great people. But if you're noticing patterns like that, it can let you know a lot about a church. But again, we're going to look at both of these, and both of these churches have really good things. Both of these churches have questionable things, and both of these churches have, red flags that it's just like, hey, that would concern me. It's really hard for me to recommend the church based off just that. But again, no single red flag is going to make us say we can't recommend this church, okay? What we're looking at about 43 red flags right now, okay? That number will grow as we see different red flags, but we're looking at about 43 red flags. We want to see how many they have. All churches, this is important, all churches are going to have red flags, okay? Having red flags doesn't mean that it's a church you need to stay away from. What we're looking for is how many red flags does the church have versus how many green flags do they have and how many yellow flags they have. And yellow are just, hey, caution, there's some questions you need to ask. We can't get all these answers, but we do have some questions. This could go positively. It could go negatively. So with that being said, let's go ahead and let's start out with First Baptist Tifton, Georgia, pastored by TJ Malden. That's going to be the first church that we look at. All right, and there's a couple of things that I want to look at anytime that I'm looking at a church, okay? The first 2 things that I'm going to look at, these big buckets, I'm going to look at governance. That's going to be the first one. What does a church say and tell us about their governance? What kind of governance do they have? What kind of accountability do they have for church leaders? And the second thing that I'm going to look at in almost every church, because it's very telling, is finances. How transparent is this church about their finances? Because governance issues and accountability issues, as well as financial issues, those are 2 things that we see in almost every single scandal, every single abuse situation with a church. So let's go ahead. I want to look at governance first. So you're going to see FBC's website right here. You got the normal. We're going to see just kind of videos moving of church life. You see their mission statement, which we'll come back to here in a little bit. Love God, love people, multiply disciples, services, I'm new, all that sort of stuff. But what I want to look through is I really want to look for governance issues. So where can we look? Okay, I'm just going to scroll through. I see the welcome from TJ, right? I see all that. Okay, so what I'm going to go through, I'm going to look and just see, hey, plan your visit, about us. What's one of the first things you notice there? Our leadership. So we're going to go ahead and click that. When we click on our leadership, what do we find? We find the ministry team. Now, these all look like staff members, okay? So you see the care pastor here, pastor of small groups. You see TJ, the lead pastor. We see executive assistants. We see student pastors like this guy right here, music pastors. We see interns. I love that they're even including their interns. Okay, so this is a whole list of all of their staff members. Now, there's a couple of things that we can learn from this. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. Okay, but one of the things that we can learn from this, right, is we can learn how many staff that they have, okay, how many staff they have. And by my count, First Baptist Tifton has about 29 staff right now. So this is a pretty large church with 29 staff. It looks like most of those are probably full-time. But staff doesn't tell me a lot about governance, okay? So I want to look for more. I want to see more than just staff. So our leadership, what we believe, mission, vision, and values, beacon, bylaws, ministry budget. Don't see anything there. Connect, that looks like it's just ministries. Don't see anything there. Groups, events, serve, give, deacon election. Okay, deacon election is going to tell us something about this church. So let's go ahead. Let's click on deacon election, and here's what we're going to find. Deacon election 2025, Dear First Baptist Church family. A couple of weeks ago, you were asked to nominate men who you believe to be above reproach and qualified to serve as a deacon in our church. They're screening the qualifications as required by their constitution and bylaws. So that'll be a question here in a minute about governance as well. Does the church list their bylaws? Because you can't hide anything once you have your bylaws. It tells you exactly what the governance is for a church. All right, so they got 24 men who have met those requirements and agreed to serve if elected. Everybody gets to vote for up to 7 people. So here's the deal. They've got it where people can vote. Right here, you see who these new deacons would be, okay? And generally, at a Baptist church, if you're going to see deacons, the deacon board is usually going to be like the elder board. It's going to be the governing board. Here's the cool thing, though. We're learning something about their governance. If the church is voting on these board members, they're voting on these deacons, then that means this church is likely a congregationally led church, which means their governance starts and ends with the congregation. Everybody in the congregation, every member has a voice. So if you have a concern, you have a way to voice that concern. And at the end of the day, it's the congregation that makes the decisions most likely about who serves as pastor and who serves as deacons and all of that. And we see this in this deacon election, that some of the people who are going to be leading more day to day and who are going to be making these decisions, putting together business meetings, all that, they're being voted on by the church. And this is pretty refreshing because in a lot of non-denominational churches today, the new models that are really popular, the church doesn't vote on elder boards or deacons, okay? And then you have to ask, how did they get chosen? Well, a lot of times they are chosen specifically by the pastors they're working with, and that gets a lot of yes men, okay? You cannot, TJ Malden cannot put a bunch of yes men on his deacon board if they are being voted on and nominated by the church body. So that tells us a lot. I'm going to go ahead and we are going to go back to the website. Okay. So we found out they've got deacons. We found out there's congregational leadership. We found out about their staff. Let's continue to look. What else can we find out about their leadership? Look right here. Their bylaws are right there on the website. Now I'm going to go ahead and tell you, this is a really good sign. This is something most churches don't do. And I'm going to give them credit, right? When TJ and I first met, we did not agree on some stuff. That's how we got together. But I remember looking at this website the first time and saying, wow, stuff like bylaws being on your website, that is uber transparent. It's something most churches don't do. That tells me a lot about this church. All right, they got their bylaws here. So let's go ahead and download the bylaws. And guys, look at this. You're going to see, holy cow, 26 pages of bylaws. Now, just so that you know, we try to set one of our values at SAI is we want to set the example for churches and what transparency should look like. One of the ways we did that was to put our bylaws on our website so everybody could see how we're governed, how we make decisions. So for a church to do this is a really big deal. We look through their bylaws. Bylaws can be really boring, but they can tell you a lot. Article 1 is their basic statement of faith, their beliefs. Article 2 talks about membership, okay? This lets you know that they are congregationally led. This church has members, and at the end of the day, the members are who are leading. It talks about new member orientation, how new members can be there. The voting rights of members are right there. How members can be terminated. It talks about church discipline. What is okay with church discipline? What is not? How it can be instituted. All those sort of things. How the members are going to meet and do business, right? Like right there, church business. Regular meetings, annual meetings, special business meetings, a quorum, how many people you have to vote on something, how they're going to vote, all of that sort of stuff. It tells us about church officers, okay? So you got the church officers, which is the pastor, the deacon officers, and then you have a treasurer, assistant treasurer, church clerk, and assistant church clerk. So again, the deacons are going to be very involved In that process, everybody who has an office has to be elected, including the pastor, their duties, the election of the pastor, the term of the pastor, right? The dismissal, this is big, the dismissal of a pastor. If TJ is doing something inappropriate, if he's doing something sinful, if he's doing something that would disqualify him, right there in black and white before you ever visit this church, you know how the pastor could be removed and dismissed. That tells us a lot about accountability. It tells us about the individual offices, church staffs, termination of church staffs. It's got a whole section for the deacons, okay? And the deacons shall be voting members of the body of deacons, the number of deacons you're going to have, the qualifications, their elections. So as you see, all of this stuff, and again, that can be really boring. We learn a lot about a church when they give us their bylaws. So let's go ahead and think about what have we learned here about their governance so far. One question I always like to ask, is there a board that is not a bunch of yes men? And yes, I would check that off. Their elder board are basically their deacons. Their governance info. Do they publicly publish the governance info? Yes, their bylaws are on the website. You can't get much more transparent and public than that. Do they have concentrated power at the top? So again, let's go back. We look at the bylaws and we realize that TJ Malden is just, while he's the leader of the staff, he's subject to the deacons. He is subject to the congregation. We've seen how he can be dismissed. We've also seen this. He doesn't get to pick his deacon board. He doesn't get to pick the other people in office of the church. So what does that let us know? It lets us know that there's not concentrated power at the top, okay? Because also those deacons are going to serve terms. They're going to be voted on and nominated by the church. So there is no concentrated power. There are no yes men. So right now we have, that's 3 green flags right there. One of the things I look for as well are board members, what I call absentee landlords. Is the governing board made up of a lot of people who are outside of the church, outside of the city. And I call them absentee landlords because they're not there day to day to see what's going on. So when church discipline needs to happen, it's very difficult for them to do. Well, that's another green flag. These are all local members of the church body who are voted on, who have to be regularly and consistently a part of the church body to stay deacons. Another thing that I look at, and I put this in the governance bucket, is there any pastoral conflict of interest that I could see? So what are we talking about with things like conflict of interest? It could be book sales. It could be other organizations they're a part of that the church is also a part of. Anything that might cause a conflict of interest. And as I look at the entire website, I don't see anything else that would be a conflict of interest here. So that's going to be another green flag as far as governance goes. One thing that I'm also looking for every single time we look at governance is nepotism. Nepotism, okay? So let's just kind of look through here. Do you see any other Maldens? Do you see multiple people who had the same last name here as we're going through the staff list? And I'm not noticing that. Right? I'm not noticing any other Maldens. That's the big thing, the pastor's family. I'm not noticing very many at all who have the same last name. I think the only ones I noticed was there were maybe 2 people who shared the same last name, right? So out of 29 staff, none of the pastor's family is on staff. We don't have, I didn't notice on the deacon election, let me see. I'm not noticing any names right off the bat that stand out to me that were last names of staff members. Again, there's no Maldens there. So for me, when I look at that, it looks like basically the appearance is there's not nepotism. There's 29 members of the staff. They're not coming from just a couple of families here. So that's going to be another green flag. Another thing that we ask, and this is really simple, but are the staff clearly labeled and clearly put out there on the website for you to see? You're going to be surprised at how many churches don't put their staff members out where you can clearly see who serves on staff, is there nepotism, and all that kind of stuff. And as you can see, every person is listed, what they do, a little bit about them, okay, and their email. So I appreciate that. That is another green flag for me about their staff. Now, the last thing that we look for under governance is I'm always looking to see, is there a reporting policy? And what I mean by a reporting policy is, how do you report sin? How do you report scandal? How do you report spiritual abuse? I don't see any reporting policy. When I looked at the bylaws, and again, I could look again, you can look, I could have missed it. I didn't see any sort of reporting policy. Now, I will tell you, this is something a lot of churches don't do. They don't even think about. This is something we teach churches to do through SAI. We help them put together holistic and safe reporting policies, and we walk them through the process of how to publish that for people to see. So while it's not a huge red flag, it's not something that we would necessarily expect, it is a red flag. So out of all of those, right, out of all of those for governance, there was one red flag. All the rest were green. So well done, First Baptist, Tifton, Georgia. I'm surprised every time I look at it. I was surprised the first time that I saw it. So now let's look at finances, okay? Finances are always a really big thing to look at with churches, because finances are going to tell you a lot, okay? It is really easy to not be transparent with finances. If a church is willing to be transparent with their finances, it tells you a lot about them. They don't have a lot to hide. They're willing to operate more above reproach, okay? That's something we want, because a church should not be hiding their finances. So first thing I'm going to look for, is there a publicly available financial report? Okay, so again, plan your visit, look at About Us. Right here, you're going to see it, the 2024 ministry budget. Let's go ahead and look at it. You can download this as well, so it's not just through the website, but they've got it all right here. The 2024 ministry budget is, it tells you a little bit about it. It's a letter from TJ. It's also a couple of highlights from the finance committee chair. That's pretty cool. Not letting me highlight that, but right there, Clay Lamb, finance committee chair. So he's letting people know how much the budget increased. Their total budget is $3.67 million. Okay. But let's look at this. This is publicly available. Is it detailed? One of the things you're going to notice, if there are financial reports, many times for churches, they're not detailed. There's 4 or 5 buckets or less, and that doesn't tell us how the money is being spent. Okay. So let's just look right here. I love this. We don't just have 2024. We have 2023 and 2024. Okay, so we can look how much did the budget go up or down in all of these areas. And it starts out with missions and benevolences, which is really good, because missions and benevolences is normally going to be the money that a church is spending out. They're spending to transform their community, the world. It's not insular. Okay, it's being spent on helping people and really being the church. So the cooperative program, which is going to be the Southern Baptist missions kind of program, they give $331,000 there. You see, they give some money, $36,000 or so, to the Georgia Baptist Convention, and they list all of these from different organizations that they give to, like Brother Charlie Center. Benevolence, how much are they giving to benevolence? That's $24,000 to benevolence, usually for their members. So benevolence is most often going to be somebody in the church needs help paying their mortgage or their light bill. Something's happened, hospital bills, medical bills, whatever. They got $24,000 dedicated to that. $6,000 is dedicated toward their counseling ministry. You see that didn't go up. Now, all of this stuff, you see it right there. One of the things I'm looking at on these as well are any of these organizations that aren't really missions but might just look like it. I don't really see any of those that aren't going to missions. Okay, so total missions and benevolence, that's $587,000. And I keep forgetting, I can't highlight on here. $587,000, over $500,000 is going toward missions and benevolence. That's really, really good, especially when you look at, again, what was the total budget out of $3.6 million. And I'm not great at math. You can do the math at home, but out of $3.6 million, almost $6 million is going toward missions and benevolence. That's a pretty good chunk that is going out. That's going to be well over 10% if I'm doing the math right. Okay, salaries and allowances. I wish this was broken out a little bit more. When we teach churches, we teach them to break this out a bit more. But churches get funny. People get funny with, others knowing their salaries. We don't think they should, but this is generally going to be a place where we're lucky if we see anything. So salaries and allowances, housing allowances is what it's talking about. You got just shy of 2 million, 1.96 million. Okay. Now what we can do as well, and I'll go ahead and do a little bit of quick math, pull up a calculator here. Remember, they had 29 staff members, if I counted right. So let's go ahead and take that 964, 814, 64, and let's divide that by 29 people. That would give you an average salary for their staff of $67,000, $67,752. So let's just call it $68,000. There's going to be people who make more, people who make less. That's why I like to see more detail here. Even if it's not individual salaries, I like to see more detail because you can have like really big executive salaries hidden like that, which, we'll do a whole nother video on that later. But overall, that average number does not look that bad. Okay. $68,000 is not an exorbitant salary by any means in most communities. In some communities, it can be a really kind of small salary. Most communities, $68,000 is going to be a livable, decent salary. Okay, so I don't see any huge red flags there. Education and worship, it goes through like their kids ministry, student ministry, college ministry, senior adults, music, Sunday school, all of that, hospitality. You're looking at 1.126. So basically 2 million on the salaries. You're up to 3.1 million roughly on education and worship, and then for missions and benevolence, it's almost 6 million. So there's their budget. There's a lot of line items, okay? This is pretty darn detailed, and again, it shows you the total ministry budget, and it went up by about $200,000. That's not a huge increase. I don't see any really big red flags there. I do like this as well. The staff that works in the finance department, Sandy Taylor, Michelle Hammond, and Melanie Rains, we know exactly who they are. And who are the finance committee members? Okay, there's a lot of people. Look at this. There's a lot of people who had a role in putting together and approving this budget. You know exactly who they are before you ever step foot on the church. So this is really transparent for me. Honestly, guys, this is more transparent than you're going to see for most budgets. So public financial report, check. Let's look at some of the other green flags and red flags, because that's a green flag. Is the finance report detailed? That's the second question we ask. That's a big green flag. This is really detailed. There's a couple of small places I like more detail, like a staff, like I would like to see like pastors and executive staff, non-pastoral staff, pastoral staff. Just breakdowns like that would let us know, if there are any exorbitant salaries that are being hidden. I don't think there are, but that does leave that for a question. So if there's more of a breakdown, that could be helpful. But overall, I would say this is very, very detailed, more detailed than most churches. So huge green flag there. One of the things we look for as well, is there a 90-day tithe challenge? If you're not familiar with these, 90-day tithe challenges have become really, really popular, and they exist at almost every single one of these churches where we see big spiritual abuse situations. So I didn't see anything in the budget. Let's go to give. I do like their little tagline right there. We want to give because we're glad, generous, and grateful. And again, if you hadn't listened to TJ's episode, he actually talks about that a little bit. But they have ways to give, text, check, stock, all those sort of things. All right, so I don't see anything here about a 90-day tithe challenge, which is normally going to be on your giving page. So that's going to be a green flag. Let's look for next compulsory tithe language. Now, if you believe in a tithe, that's okay, right? Now, we've got a video right here where we talk about why tithing was not historically a part of the early church and why tithing was never biblically money. So the way we do tithing today, I don't think is the right way to do it, okay? But churches can do tithing. The thing that we look for, though, is a lot of abusive churches, they use compulsory tithing language. If you don't tithe at minimum 10% of your money, you're displeasing God, and they use that to manipulate and to bring people into guilt and fear, okay? Let's just see what they say here. As Christians, one of the ways we honor God and live in obedience is through giving of our financial blessings. Like any church, FBC relies on the faithful and generous support of our members and friends. Without your support, we would not be able to accomplish the mission of reaching our world for Christ. Then they give ways to give. So I don't see a single bit of compulsory tithing language, and there's no guilt and fear language here. They talk about it a lot of the ways that we talk about it. Hey, SAI is a donor-funded nonprofit. So we only operate because generous people like you give. So if you want to see us continue doing this work, we would love it if you'd partner with us financially, but we're never telling people that God wants you to partner with us financially. It's not a matter of if you give to us, it doesn't make God more or less happy. And that's the same way they're talking about it here, which I really appreciate as a church. So that's going to be no 90-day tithe challenge, big green flag, no compulsory tithe language, big green flag. One of the other things I look for is miracle offerings, legacy offerings. I haven't seen anything about that from this church. One of the things I don't see that I would love to look at, I don't see their messages anywhere. Maybe I'm overlooking it. A lot of times you have stuff down here at the bottom. Often you can find more from the links at the bottom than you can actually find at the top. But I don't see a lot of their messages other than maybe, YouTube. So let's just go to YouTube here. Let's look at their videos. Normally, if you're going to have a miracle offering, okay, or a big manipulative end of the year offering, it's going to happen in November. Looks like they're doing a series right now that's pretty long called The Great Reset. And I do like this. This isn't something that we look for, but it looks like they're going through 1 John verse by verse. Okay, so that is not always a green flag, but it's often a good sign. Okay. Let's look all the way back to a year ago to the holidays, and let's just see if we see anything that looks like a miracle offering. I don't see a miracle offering. The only thing that I do see is it looks like last November they did a Glad, Generous, Grateful series where they did talk about tithe, they talked about time. You can learn a lot from listening to how TJ talks about the tithe. And again, that's not a non-negotiable for everybody. Is it really compulsory, guilt, or fear-based language? My guess is from talking with TJ that it's not going to be. From looking at the rest of their church, it's not going to be. But listening to that message, it would tell you a lot. But this is not framed as some sort of end-of-the-year campaign. Miracle offering doesn't look like a lot of manipulation. Only one of the videos looks like it's about tithing or giving. This one looks like it's probably about serving. And then this is the Glad, Generous, Grateful. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you, usually if this is a miracle offering type campaign, they're not going to let someone else speak. And that last message is not TJ. Okay, so that's important to know. I'm going to look down a little bit farther just to make sure. I don't see anything that would tell us that there is even potentially a miracle offering that they take place in. So that is going to be another green flag for me. There's no guilt or fear language I've seen. Green flag there. And the last thing we ask about finances are the annual reports. Is there anything deceptive about it? Okay. And you're going to see in the next red flag review exactly what we're talking about with deceptive annual reports. There's nothing I see that's deceptive about this, right? Like, again, you get a letter from TJ, you hear from the finance committee chair. There's a lot of detail here. There's 2 years to compare here. This is what churches used to always look like, but now they don't. And then again, they share the staff, the finance committee members. So I don't see anything that would be deceptive there. So under finances, this is super rare, guys. This is incredibly rare. All green flags for First Baptist Church Tifton, okay? The next thing that I like to look at systems, okay? And we're going to expand these systems. I look for certain systems right off the bat, but you're going to see in some of these other red flag reviews, as we grow, there are other systems that when we notice them, we just put them in place of one of these systems. But I'm looking for any ties to growth track or ARC, okay? So we look for growth track, which is tied to ARC. We look for 21-day fasting, 21-day prayer and fasting. And again, there is nothing wrong with your church doing a 21 days of prayer and fasting. But the Bible doesn't really teach about 21 days of prayer and fasting a lot. If you were going to do prayer and fasting biblically, it would probably be like 40 days or 7 days because of the numerology of those numbers. 21-day prayer and fasting, there's nothing wrong with it. but it does come from an organization called ARC. We're going to do a lot more videos coming up soon while we have issues with those. If you want to know our concerns with Growth Track, we did a podcast where we talked about Growth Track. We did a couple of episodes where we talked about Growth Track. I'll link them here, why we have issues with Growth Track. But again, all of these ARC systems, they tend to be really involved in a lot of these unsafe religious trauma, spiritual abuse situations. Not saying that's the cause, but there is a correlation there, okay? We're looking for serve days, because serve days, that language of we have a serve day where we ask everybody in our church to serve on one day and wear the same t-shirt, that's actually a thing that people do through ARC and Church of the Highlands in general. Helps boost a lot of numbers, helps them look really generous. It's really a PR campaign for the church more than it is serving. You all wear the shirts for a reason. It's a PR campaign to let your city know what your church is doing. We look for a college. That's another problematic system. Does the church have its own college? And again, is there something wrong with colleges? No. But more often than not, there is hubris involved when a church thinks, you know what, rather than any of the Christian colleges and seminaries we already have available, we believe that the best education could be brought through us starting our own college. We talked about that in previous episodes as well. That is generally just a way to, it's really a talent pipeline is all it is. We look for something called kingdom builders a lot. Kingdom builders is it's basically people in your church with money, and you put them on a serve team where the senior pastor spends a lot of time with them, basically trying to get them, that their serving gift is they're funding all these extravagant ministries of the church. It's very manipulative from my experience. And again, it's there in a lot of these churches. And then freedom. I love the freedom curriculum. I love freedom groups. So if you are familiar with that, I've led a bunch of those. There's nothing wrong with those. I like the Freedom Conference. But not only is this an ARC system, I will tell you, it can be used to spiritually manipulate people in unhealthy environments. So again, if you've just got freedom, that's no big deal. But how many of these red flags does a church have? If they're doing Growth Track, they're doing 21 days of prayer and fasting, Serve Day, college, Kingdom Builders, freedom, that lets me know the more of these things they're doing, probably the more tied to ARC and their way of doing things they are, which would be a big red flag. So just looking at this, I didn't notice here, looking at Connect, looking at About Us, there's nothing about Growth Track, and this is pretty easy because this website doesn't have a lot at the bottom. So that's a green flag. There's no Growth Track. There's no college. There's no Kingdom Builders. There's no freedom. I don't see any of that. Now, I will say, let's look at, is there a 21-day of prayer and fasting? So let me go ahead and pull this up. I've got the link. And we're going to see that there is 21 days of prayer and fasting. Found this on their Instagram. So again, we're not just looking at a church's website, but their Instagram. Now, this was 44 weeks ago. It was the beginning of January. And normally that's when this happens, the beginning of January and maybe before their miracle offering. Some churches do it twice. But in January, they did the 21 days of prayer and fasting. It doesn't look like, from what we see here, that this is really tied to ARC. I think it's just, hey, other churches have done prayer and fasting. We want to do prayer and fasting. 3 weeks is really easy. So I think that's all it is. But that is going to be really our first red flag. Really our first red flag since reporting policy. Okay, 21-day fast. Again, one red flag is not a big deal. Most of these problematic systems are not there. But also let's look at Serve Day, because it does look like, again, that there is a Serve Day. So let me go ahead. Let's plug in the link. This is going to be from Instagram as well. Yes, 52 weeks ago, there was a Serve Day. Usually those are in the summer or the fall, so November 11th. Again, this does not look like it's tied to ARC. Doesn't look like First Baptist Tifton is tied to ARC. They probably notice other churches are doing this. That kind of red look is how a lot of the shirts look. I don't think it's anything to be super worried about, but there are 2 red flags as far as within the systems that we look for, okay? The other thing that we look for affiliations, okay? Overall, is there an affiliation with ARC? I haven't seen anything here that would tell me there's an affiliation with ARC, okay? And they're not connected to enough for it to show me that there is an affiliation with ARC. Okay, so I don't see that. So that's going to be a green flag. Their guest speakers. Let's go ahead and look back at their messages. Okay, right here on YouTube. Guest speakers, those kind of affiliations. Are there guest speakers people who have been tied to spiritual abuse or scandal, or they're tied to other churches that maybe look unhealthy? I see a lot of TJ, so it looks like TJ preaches most weeks. It looks like whoever this person is, Pastor Kenny Miller, it looks like he's on staff. So he's preaching there, right? Looks like this is another pastor on staff that's preaching right there. Again, a lot more of TJ. This looks like Kenny Miller again. Okay. Let me see. Whoever Barry is, someone's preaching right there. That looks like someone from their church. I am not noticing it's Kenny again. I'm not noticing for a full year. I don't see many guest speakers that aren't a part of their church. I don't see anybody that I would worry about those affiliations. So that's going to be a green flag as well. I don't see anything. The ECFA, the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, sounds like a good group to be a part of. But if you've watched any of our podcast episodes where we talked about that, like the miracle offerings. So if you want to learn more about miracle offerings or the ECFA, watch this video. It's going to show you a lot more about that. You're going to learn a lot more about that. But it's a bit problematic. It's a rubber stamp that looks like there's a lot of accountability that a lot of churches seem to be a part of that are actually incredibly non-transparent with their finances, hide a lot of big money. Okay. I don't see their connection to any of that. I'll tell you the only affiliation that bothers me, and here's a red flag. Again, this is our third red flag. This is an SBC church. Okay. And again, there's a lot of different ways that we know. The best way that we know, though, the easiest way to go back and show you, go back and look at the budget. They're giving to the cooperative program and they're giving to their state Baptist convention. Those are two things that Southern Baptists do. Every Southern Baptist church has to give to the cooperative program. That's part of being in cooperation and partnership with them, which means being a part of the denomination. And Southern Baptist churches are usually going to do the same, giving to their state convention. Okay, so it's a Southern Baptist church. Does that mean it's a bad church or unsafe on its own? No, but that is a red flag, because if you're not familiar, Southern Baptists they've had a lot of issues and a lot of allegations and a lot of scandal come up because over the past couple of years, a lot has come out, including an FBI probe, where there have been sexual assault allegations. There's been things that have been covered up. And the SBC has just not been, they have not been the beacon of transparency. I am an ordained Southern Baptist minister who has been ashamed over the last decade to say that. Okay. So that is an affiliation that's worth looking for. But it doesn't mean I don't see anything about this church that would lead me to believe that they're doing any of those things. It just might be something worth asking questions about. Like, hey, what do you guys think about what's going on with the SBC? What are we doing differently at this church? What is First Baptist Church Tifton doing differently to make sure that children are protected, to make sure that women are protected? Again, that's another great place to ask that question about the reporting policy. How would we report if something was happening? All those sorts of things. Also, ask them if they can keep you updated about what the denomination is doing to fix these things. So affiliation, something we ask about. Something else I like to look at, I look at narcissism markers for the organization, for the church. So one of the things I look for is special me language. When you look about the church and you look at their mission, vision, and values, is there language that looks like God gave them a special mission where they're better than every other church and there's something that only God could do through them? And it's language about, we're a movement or, stuff like that, right? I don't see that here. Their strategy, their vision, it's all about discipleship, their values, it's simple stuff. And then, of course, their mission, love God, love people, multiply disciples. That's basically straight out of the Bible. I haven't seen anything else that is what I would call that special me language, okay? And if you want to know more about the Special Me acronym, because Special Me is an acronym that helps us to see narcissistic behavior, check out episode number 1 where we talked about Special Me. We break it down in depth. You can check that out here, okay? But that's a green flag. I don't see any of that. Regurgitated mission statements is another narcissism red flag that we look for. There are a lot of churches that say, hey, we're a part of the same church growth systems, and so we're going to find a church that has a really good mission statement, and we're all going to use the same mission statement. So, so if you find freedom, discover purpose, and all of those are arc regurgitations. This one isn't a regurgitated mission statement, although there's a lot of churches that have love God, love people. That's not a regurgitated mission statement just because that's Bible. Love God, love people. That's the great commandment. Multiply disciples is not something you're going to see in a lot of mission statements. So that's a green flag. They're not, stealing from another church there. Another narcissism marker is plagiarized sermons. When I looked through the sermons here, and I have to keep going back to YouTube for this, I wish their sermons were just on the website, but I get it. I don't see anything that looks like it is stolen from someone else, because I know a lot of these titles, they don't look like that. Like multiply disciples right there, that is just from their church. Love God, love people, multiply disciples, that's they're preaching through their mission statement. Palm Sunday, the cross, resurrection, healing, suffering, worship. Again, when you look back at like these down here, self-control, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, they're not stealing those from anybody. It's not plagiarism. Those are the fruit of the Spirit. Okay. Let's come back up and look. Reset is going through 1 John. So yeah, there's no markers of plagiarism, of selling, buying sermons, preaching sermons that aren't their own. There's no markers there. So that's a green flag. Franchise campuses. Is it a church that has the hubris to believe rather than, and again, not everybody's going to agree on this, but rather than planting new churches, a city would be better, our city would be better if we just planted new campuses just like us, because we're the best. We're the Chick-fil-A of churches kind of thing. Doesn't look like they're multi-campus. And again, not all multi-campus are franchise churches. A lot of those have their, a lot of churches that have multi-campuses have their own pastors. They're speaking, they're teaching. The community is different. I don't see any of that here, though, so that's a green flag. Toxic honor language is something we look for. I haven't seen any of that. Unity language used to manipulate people. I haven't seen any of that. And then one of the last things we look at there for multi-site churches, or churches that even aren't multi-site, do they count like prison ministries or international churches they planted as campuses, just so they can, and why this is important. If a church is having to count those things as campuses and locations, a lot of times it's just because they want to, with pride, say, this is how many locations we have. Okay, a lot of churches, they may say we have 15 locations, when in reality they have 8. They have 8 campuses and locations. Everything else is stuff that they're counting. It's prison ministry, it's international churches they planted that they just put their name on. The next thing that I look at a bucket with volunteers. Are there any red flag volunteers? Is there a volunteer membership covenant? I didn't see it here. Okay. I just don't see a volunteer membership covenant. When I look at serve, let's go here to serve faithfully. It talks about all the ministries that you can be a part of. I don't see a, membership covenant where you have to do certain things, abide by certain things to serve. And again, those aren't necessarily bad, but a lot of churches use those even down to how you have to dress, and it's a control tactic. So that's a green flag. Purpose language is something we look for, where churches try to say that, hey, if you serve at our church, this is how you fulfill your purpose, find your purpose. That can be really damaging, and it's also not what serving in the body does. So let's see what they say. Serve faithfully. All of us were created by God to make a difference in the life of another person. God has placed you with your unique abilities and passions, can touch the life of others. If you believe that God has called you to become a member at FBC Tifton, we believe that you have a place specifically designed for you to serve Him. And then it's Scripture. So I don't see purpose language there. I don't see anywhere else it is. So let's see. Use your unique gifts to help build the kingdom. You're helping build the kingdom. You can do that other places. You don't have to do that here. So purpose language, I don't see it. That is a green flag. Now, here's a yellow flag and a red flag. we look for things like dream team monikers. Okay. Are you calling your volunteers something that really kind of makes it feel like the in crowd, like you're doing the right thing, you're pleasing God more if you're on these teams? And again, we talked about this in other episodes. It's just something, it's a language and manipulation that a lot of churches use that we have seen unsafe situations in, okay? They don't use the dream team moniker for their volunteers, but they do call them difference makers, the difference maker team. Now, again, it's not huge, it's nothing super bad about that, but that kind of language can be used manipulatively, okay? So for me, that is a yellow flag simply because none of the other language around it is used other than they call it a difference maker team. So it's a yellow flag. All that means is I would ask some questions about it. I would ask some questions of why do you call them the difference maker team instead of volunteers? I would look at how they talk about their volunteers, how they talk about serving. Just ask some questions about that, okay? And then the next thing, this is a red flag. Let's look at the volunteer opportunities. One of the things we look for is, does a church have volunteer opportunities that have a lot of ways that they ask you to volunteer going out to serve as the church, to serve your community outside the four walls? Or are the majority of them insular volunteer opportunities where it's about serving the church and its ministries? Kids ministry, office support, recreation and activities, music worship, student ministry, small groups, safety, hospitality, senior adult, benevolence, adult evangelism, red door, door holders. It looks like most of these, and this is being nitpicky, but it looks like most of these are very insular. So that would be a red flag, for me, that the ways that you serve within the church are all about the church. Doesn't seem like there's a lot outside of the serve days going out, places where you could regularly serve, just making a difference in your community through the church. The last thing that we look at here, is there any indication that you are required to tithe to be a volunteer? And there isn't. Okay, so required tithing to the church to be a volunteer is often a control tactic that turns. Okay, so for the most part, all green flags there, except for one red and one yellow. All right, so we're almost done with this red flag. Let's look at a couple of other things. We look at business operations and things like that. So a couple of things we're looking for. Does it look like the church is selling non-resource-based merch? So we're not talking about selling devotionals. We're not talking about selling Bibles or anything like that. But, does it look like the church is selling a bunch of like shirts and hoodies and other stuff that's just, that isn't necessarily connected to the ministry that you don't have to have? I don't see any there, so that's a green flag. Some churches, believe it or not, are actually selling coffee, and it looks like you can order from a Starbucks, okay? So instead of having coffee available, which there's nothing wrong with, they're actually selling stuff like they're a Dunkin' Donuts or a Starbucks or something like that. I think that goes too far and can be, a red flag kind of sign. You got to ask questions. Where's that money going? What is it going for? Why are we, having to be extra with all this? Why are we not just having people stop and get, their fancy coffee before they get here? But I don't see any of that, so it's a green flag. And the other thing we look for, a lot of churches have music production right now where it's like, hey, we're making music, we're streaming our own music on Spotify, we've got our own label, all of that. I don't see any of that here, okay? And again, why are those things bad? They're not necessarily bad, but if you're selling a bunch of stuff at your church that you don't have to sell, and you're doing a lot of like music label stuff that's going outside of the church, that can be a sign of something to watch out for. One thing that I will say there, okay, and this is something that is a little bit of a yellow flag for me. It's a small one. There is a podcast that they do, and I know TJ does it. I've listened to it. It's a decent podcast, right? I've had TJ on the podcast. I like him. But there is a podcast. I'm trying to remember where it is. It kind of took me a minute to find it. I didn't think that they had the podcast at the beginning, and then they did. So let me see. Let me see if I can find this. Media, right here. So under Connect, go to Media. This is where it was. It talks about the media ministry, which is, fantastic. Every church needs a media ministry. But then right here on the website, the TJ Malden Leadership Podcast, Life Leadership, and the Gospel. When churches do podcasts, it is not always a yellow flag or red flag. The question is the podcast aimed out? And if it's aimed outside of, supporting your church and your volunteers and your members, what's the reason it's aimed out? Okay. Is it to do a specific ministry? Because there's a lot of churches that are starting podcasts simply because they want to raise the influence level, or, they of their senior pastor. They want to be known. They want, other churches learning leadership from them. It's really kind of sexy and trendy for your pastor to be the big leadership guy. And a lot of the reasons why churches do that is for those kind of prideful reasons. Okay. It's trying to raise our influence and the way that we look. It's aimed outside of the church instead of a ministry of the church. And it's not aimed at sharing the gospel. It's just, stuff like that. I think TJ's, when I've listened to it, it sounds like it's mainly aimed at his church. Okay. So if that's the case, it's not that big of a deal. If it is aimed more out, then one of the questions we have to ask is if it's aimed more out and it's just trying to build someone's brand, then at that point, are like church staff being paid to do it, being paid to produce it, being paid to put it on, because that is a conflict of interest, and that's really not church ministry. Now, again, I don't think that's the case. I think this is mainly for their church ministry, but they also use it as something that their church members in their community can share. Hey, have you listened to this podcast? My pastor does it. So I think it's done in the right way. That is a yellow flag for me, not a red flag, just a yellow flag. If I was checking out the church for the first time, I'd ask some questions about why they do the podcast and why the podcast is tied to the church. If it was the church podcast instead of the TJ Malden leadership podcast, I probably wouldn't even do a yellow flag. But because you couldn't tell it was tied to the church at all just by looking at it, other than it being on their website, it is something that I would look for. All right, so one of the things we look for with the church is just what is their care process? Do they have a good care process for people? We've already looked, they spend a lot of money on benevolence. So there seems to be a good care process there. We've seen they spend money on counseling, and they work to get people, staff and parishioners in counseling. So I think there's a pretty good care process there, but it's not listed very well on their website. So I'm having to pick up breadcrumbs from other places. So I'm going to call that a yellow flag, really only because a yellow flag doesn't mean bad. Yellow flag means we got more questions, okay? I would, if I was checking out the church, I would just ask, hey, what are your care processes? How does someone get into counseling? How does someone go for benevolence? Where do we get pastoral care? Is that from the staff? Is that a small group? Like, just getting to know those answers. So that would be a yellow flag. And then the very last thing that I look at when I'm looking at FBC Tifton is I'm looking at the staff to attender ratio. Why is that important? So let's go back over to our leadership. They've got 29 staff. Okay, why is it important to know, right, what the staff to parishioner ratio is? Well, it tells us, again, a lot about care. The average church is going to have about one full-time staff member for every 100 people. Okay, I'm not saying that's healthy or unhealthy. That is simply the average church of all denominations in America. I would say it probably needs to be a little less than that, because it's really hard to shepherd and care for and know by name, over 100 people. Okay. And we don't see that in the early church, right? So, again, doesn't mean it has to be staff, but there needs to be a care process. But the staff to attender ratio, if it goes over 1 to 100, they're going to be stretched really thin to make sure that you are taken care of. I looked, and it looks like, let me see. I'm going to show you this because this is pretty cool too. When you go to About Us, we didn't look at this. The Beacon is their newsletter, okay? And in their newsletter, The Beacon, it has a lot of things going on. They have it every single month, I believe, okay? So you see a letter from TJ Malden. He's talking about deacon discernment. He's talking about that vote. You have other things from different ministries and stuff like that. But here's what I wanted to show you that I think is pretty cool. First facts and figures for September. It shows you where they were at with their budget, monthly, yearly, special sanctuary renovation giving that they're doing. But it also shows what's the average worship attendance and small group attendance. So what you're going to see right here, and I can't highlight that, 2,029 average worship attendance. So if we take, remember they had 29 people on staff, okay? So if we take their staff list, 29 people, and we divide 2,029 people average attendance by 29 staff, we get a 1-to-70 ratio. That's well under that 1-to-100 ratio. So that's a green flag because it lets me know they have the staff to care for their parishioners at a big church, okay? You're probably going to have people there caring for you or that you can reach out to know how to find care. So overall, where are we at with First Baptist Church Tifton from looking at their website, from looking at some of their messages, from looking at social media, all publicly available information? Here's where we're at. I see 36 green flags out of 43 things that we checked, 3 yellow flags out of 43, and 5 red flags. So what that gives us is 36 green flags to 7 yellow or red flags. You see, that is way more green flags than yellow or red flags. So I would take the yellow and red flags and just use those as questions. But overall, when I look at First Baptist Church, Tifton, Georgia, we do the red flag review, I'd give them a green flag. And I would say, if someone came to me and said, Jeff, does this look like a safe church to attend? I would say, you know what? If you've been through spiritual abuse, you've been through religious trauma, and you need to land at a safe place, this looks like it's probably a safe place. I'd give you a list of questions to ask. And I would probably tell you, let someone there know what you've been through and that this is a big step for you. But overall, it looks like a place that I could recommend and say, hey, I recommend that you check it out and you ask these questions. One of the things I like to look at as well at the end of every red flag, what are my major concerns and questions? I don't have any major concerns or questions with FBC. Are there minor concerns and questions? These are much smaller. They're not deal breakers. But they are things to ask about. So for me, I would love to see a couple of minor concerns and questions, publicly displaying deacons and how to contact them. I would love to see a list of who are the current deacons and how could you contact the deacon board if you had an issue. I would like to see slightly more outside focused, community focused volunteer opportunities. The difference maker teams, that bothered me a little bit. So I'd ask some questions about that. And then probably the last and biggest concern, even though it's under the minor, is the SBC affiliation. Okay. What are the biggest positives? And this is what I like to finish with. No matter whether whether the church is scoring with more red flags or more green flags, this is a green flag church, looks to be pretty safe. We still want to end with the biggest positive. So I would say the biggest positive about First Baptist Church Tifton, they are extremely transparent about their governance, about their finances. I didn't see any manipulative language. They genuinely seem to care and have a great staff to attender ratio. So overall, if you've been through church hurt, spiritual abuse, and you asked me about First Baptist Tifton, Georgia, I would say that looks like a really safe place for you to land, check out, and they would get my recommendation. So if you're in the Tifton, Georgia area, I would encourage you, if you're looking for a place to land, go check it out, ask some questions, and see if First Baptist Church Tifton might be a good fit for you. All right, so church number two we're going to look at is Daystar Church in Cullman, Alabama. Lead pastor of Daystar is going to be Jerry Lawson. We had Jerry on this podcast here, so you can check that out, learn more about Daystar through the website. I've heard a lot of good things about Daystar personally because I know people who live in that area. Generally in red flag reviews, I'm not going to tell you that, but I do think that's important to know. I have actually heard a lot of good things about them. That doesn't mean a church is safe or not, though, so we'll move on from there. But again, let's look the same way at Daystar Church. This is a fairly large non-denominational church in Alabama. They are multi-site. So let's just look and let's start with governance here, okay? The same way you see Daystar Church, you see their messages, about us, location, groups. Let's just see if we see anything about governance, see their mission statement there, what's happening. I don't see anything about governance so far. They have a lot at the bottom, though. And most of these church websites, again, you'll find more at the bottom. Locations, Next Step, Small Group, Stream, Team Church Online. I see the ministries. Yeah, I don't see anything about their leadership other than our pastor. Maybe it shows the elders and stuff under it. Our pastor, Jerry Lawson. Yeah. So there is nothing on here about that I can see. Let me double check, make sure this leads to the same place. About us. Meet our pastor, our values, our beliefs, our locations. I just don't see anything that is telling me about governance. Okay, so let's go ahead. We'll go back to the homepage. And so for independent elders, that's got to be a yellow flag. I can't call that red because I have no clue. Sometimes when a church doesn't publish something, it's a huge red flag. For me, are they independent elders and overseers? I'm going to call that a yellow flag because I just don't know. Governance info, though, that's a red flag. It is a red flag for me that they don't have their governance info, how they're led clearly on the website. So it's one yellow, one red. Is there concentrated power at the top? Again, I have no clue because the only thing I see about is Jerry, who you see right there. So that's going to be a yellow flag. For me, absentee landlords, is their board absentee landlords. It's another yellow flag because, again, I just don't know. Pastoral conflict of interest. And again, that's book sales, other information, stuff like that. Let's go ahead and let's look. Let's find out about Jerry first, see if there's anything here. If you read, it talks about where Jerry's from. All right, right here at the back. Pastor Jerry has also mentored hundreds of pastors through 24-month on-site training process called 24 to Double. He's the president and CEO of 24 to Double and continues to serve other churches through this nonprofit ministry. So yeah, that's a little bit of a red flag. But it's just talking about the ministry. Is the ministry connected to the church? So let's go ahead and look at this. Okay. This is the 24 to Double website. So let's just look at it. Okay. Again, they're selling stuff. There's a lot here. My biggest concern with it so far is not that he's running another nonprofit. My biggest concern is that it's on the church website. Okay. It's on the church website, and I don't understand why it would be a part of his bio and on the church website if they didn't have to. Again, that's not enough to call it a red flag. Nothing looks terrible about it right off the bat. And I'm just looking at what I can see publicly because, full disclosure, I've looked deeper into all of this before. But that doesn't look too bad. But here's what I will show you. All right. And this is important to know as well. All right. So if you're not familiar, you can use something called the Wayback Machine. Okay. So if you go to web.archive.org, you can look at any website and see what it looked like in the past. So let's go ahead. We are going to go ahead and put daystar.tv in there. And I'm going to show you something that I uncovered when I looked at this, okay? And we'll look at this together. I'm going to save you time and not, just search around for a long time. So let me go ahead and find it. All right, so we went ahead and put in the Wayback we put for you see right here, April 29th, 2004. And again, I'm going to quickly go to this to save you time. But if we go to the Legacy Report, it looks different now. It's changed just in recent days. And since it's just changed, I want to show you what it looked like before. 2023, last year's Legacy Report, before they changed it, had a letter from their pastor, and then it had a lot of things, how they spent money, stuff like that. We're going to talk about their Legacy Report here in just a minute because it is important. But I want to go ahead and I want to scroll all the way down to the bottom because this is important. This is Daystar's Legacy Report, okay? This isn't 24 to Double. This isn't Pastor Jerry's personal website or anything like that. But at the bottom of their Legacy Report, it talks about mentoring churches. Our church has a long history of mentoring other churches. In fact, Daystar is so much more than a community church. For example, through 24 to Double, we have trained, not Jerry, we have trained thousands upon thousands of ministers and volunteers from around the nation. in various areas of ministry. Again, that's all good stuff. But then it says, Pastor Jerry and Executive Director Jason Zenmeister continue to lead 24 Double to train and mentor church leaders in effective ways, okay? Every year, pastors who are a part of the 24 to Double training program continue to visit Daystar for encouragement and additional training with our staff. There's a lot of information here. Our church is truly a church of churches, a lighthouse to many churches, pastors, and ministry leaders. So this is a conflict of interest to me because I can't tell where 24 to Double, this nonprofit that looks like just from its public disclosures that it's a totally different nonprofit from the church, but the church is saying it's theirs. Pastor Jerry is the CEO of it, but he's also the pastor. I also asked the question, Jason Zenmeister, their executive director, is he being paid through the ministry or is he being paid through the church? So that's going to be a red flag for me because that looks like a conflict of interest. Back to their website, though, another one of the things we look for, again, is nepotism. But if you look, messages about us, location groups, look down at the bottom as well. There's really no place to see all of their staff. The only way you can see their staff is you can look at the different locations. So if we go to locations and we go to the Cullman location page, we can see Jerry and we can see some of their staff, like the campus pastors, student pastor, worship pastor, all that. But there are other staff members that we know are staff members there that aren't listed on these pages. So because of that, I can't actually tell really well if there is nepotism present at Daystar or not. So because I can't tell that, I'm going to go ahead and give that, again, a yellow flag. There's just a lot of yellow flags here because there's a lot of things that I just don't know. As far as the reporting policy goes, I've been through their website multiple times. I haven't seen any kind of reporting policy. That's not abnormal, but that is a red flag. And then the last one, is the staff clearly represented on the website? And as we just talked about, no, they're not. You have to look for the staff. Not all the staff is there. So since the staff is not clearly visible on the website, that is going to be a red flag as well. So let's move from governance to financial. Okay, is there a public financial report? Now up here, I don't see much about finances. Let's click Give. Online giving, make an impact. Your gift makes a difference. Ways to give. I don't see an annual report there. What I do see, though, right down here, about legacy report. And again, we looked at the old one a minute ago, so let's look at the new one. And you'll notice the difference. Here was the old one, and we're going to look at the difference because there's quite a few differences here. This was the 2023 legacy report in the Wayback Machine. Here is the 2024 legacy report. And you can actually hear, I'll let you listen to a video right now, where Jerry shares that this is their annual report. So let's go ahead and we will listen to that really quickly.
I'm releasing today what we call the legacy report. Now, if you've been around Daystar a long time, we used to call this the annual report, and it is a annual report that tells everything that this church has done in the last year through your generosity. Now, we do this for two reasons, because first of all, we're going to be like Jesus, and God so loved the world that He gave. He's generous in every way, and I want to unashamedly challenge you. If you've been here very long, you know I challenge you to be generous with your time and your talent and your financial treasures, and so we're going to keep doing that. But this report kind of shows, it celebrates, hey, because we were generous, because we served, because we give, because we do missions work, this is what's happened. But also it is a way to hold ourselves accountable to the community. And so the annual report is public. It's on our website. You can go click on it.
All right, so let's just stop real quick. I want you to notice he says this is our annual report. Our legacy report is our annual report. It's a way that we're transparent. It's a way that we're accountable to our community. And I just want you to hold that in your pocket and ask the question in just a moment, is this really being accountable to their community, to their parishioners? Because sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. So just ask yourself that question in a moment as we look through this.
Actually, I can show you what that page looks like. So it's going to load up and it's going to kind of look like this.
So you see right here, that's exactly the report we're looking at. That's exactly the report on their website.
And it's going to have this awesome lady right here with this joker beside, that's me and Leslie. And it's sort of a letter. It starts right there, but it's got a lot of stuff. But it starts telling you just numbers and the numbers of people that we've reached and the number of people who've come to faith in Jesus.
Now, keep in mind, we're going to look at this closer in just a minute. It's just numbers, but ask yourself as we look at it, what kind of numbers are these? Are these financial numbers, which is what you're normally going to find in a financial report? Or are they just good, kind of random numbers? So keep that in mind as well as we check into this.
How about 3,189 people coming to faith in Jesus? Over 1,000 baptized. Another in Uganda of over 1,000 coming to faith. Come on. Wonderful stuff.
Now, have you noticed what he's saying so far? He's getting people to clap. He's getting people really excited. Look at all these numbers. They're great. And this is all great stuff. But have you noticed what kind of numbers it is? What kind of numbers it isn't? We haven't talked about any finances in this annual report so far. We've just talked about good things. They're going to make people clap. All right, so everything else he talks about is literally just their mission statement and stuff like that. It's good stuff, but we don't necessarily need to look at that together, okay? But now that you've heard, this is their annual report. This is one of the ways that they hold themselves accountable to church members. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at it. What's involved in this annual report? So let's go ahead. Legacy Report 2024, a letter from the pastor. That is normal. I'm not going to read it, although you can learn a lot from reading those. The first thing we see is average weekly attendance, about 3,000 in the United States. We'll go ahead, and that's going to be a red flag for later. They are counting Uganda and online as locations. You can also see that in the website if we just check locations. So just as a reminder, we'll go ahead and I'll show you that. We'll go ahead and get that red flag down. They show their normal locations. They also count online in Uganda. That's a simple thing, but again, that's generally a sign of some hubris that they really care about the numbers. They care about how people see how many campuses they have. So instead of having 3 campuses, we have 5 campuses because we're counting international campuses, online campuses, and all that stuff. Instead of just saying we're counting those as ministries. The next thing they have are decisions for Christ. So again, that's not bad though. I'm glad they put their attendance there. Decisions for Christ, a lot of decisions for Christ. That's like 5,000, over 5,000 decisions for Christ. Way to go. Fantastic job, church. Outreach, 7,500 lives touched. That's about 2 lives per, a little over 2 lives touched per person. All the outreach projects, talks about their different locations. You can, if you click on that, you get a letter from like the campus pastor. Next generation, Daystar students, average weekly attendance of 290. First-time guests, Decisions for Christ. Same thing with Daystar Kids, gives those numbers. Missions, 1,500 children supported, 40 churches planted globally, 86 people went on a mission trip. But that's all it is. That's all it is. What's missing here? In this annual report where they hold themselves accountable, there's no finances. There's no finances anywhere on this report. Now, here's what's really concerning. Let's go back to the Wayback Machine, and let's look at the report that was just up until a couple of weeks ago. 2023 Legacy Report had a letter from pastor, so it looks the same. Okay? It had decisions for Christ, their locations, right? All of this looks the same so far. Church Online, Uganda, kids, students. Daystar College. All right. So again, we're going to go ahead. We're going to mark a red flag for that they do have their own college. And again, with these colleges, here's what really makes it kind of frustrating. It's just through Lee University. So like go to a college or a seminary that already exists. When you have your own college as a ministry, a lot of times it is a pipeline and it's a way to get cheap labor. There's a lot of mistreatment of like interns and residents and stuff like that can happen with those. It's just a red flag to watch out for. Doesn't mean that that's happening, but it's a red flag to watch out for. But they talk about missions, small groups, next steps, outreach, now, and mentoring churches. But look at this. They at least had financials. Ask yourself the questions, though. Let's look at the financials by these old ones. Let's ask the questions. Is there a public financial report? That would have been yes before. $115,000 to benevolence, $4.7 million to campus upgrades, $914,000 to missions, 129 to events and conferences, 246 to kids, students, and college, 79 to local outreach. It's not very detailed, and it does concern me that out of their finances, 4.785, the majority of their budget went to campus upgrades, okay? But there was at least a financial report there. But we've got to look at where they're at now. This has changed. It's a red flag because no, there is no public financial report. That has actually been removed. And you got to ask the question, why did we remove these financials? Why do we not have those? So that's a red flag. Next question we got to ask, is it detailed? Well, no, it doesn't exist, so that's a red flag. But even before, this wasn't detailed. Remember how detailed First Baptist Church Tifton was? I'm going to come back over here again just to show you. Look at the difference between these two churches, okay? Look at how detailed, multiple years together. Look at the line items, salary and allowances, all of that. Look at that. And then let's come back to last year's financials with Daystar. These are night and day difference. So red flag for the old financials that they're not detailed. I'm glad they have them, but they're not detailed. But these are both red flags now because, again, they don't exist here. It's just numbers that get you excited, like attendance and missions. So that brings us down to, is it deceptive? Deceptive annual reports, even looking at this old one, financials was smushed in at the bottom with everything else. People are, of course, going to get excited and clap about outreach numbers and salvations and small groups and kids and students and missions. And look at all the differences that we made. Look at all these great numbers. Clap, 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 clap. They're so good. They're so good. They're so good. And, oh, by the way, here's what we spent on those things. Now, the problem is, though, what you spend on those things, you don't give much detail. But if people start asking questions, they would say, hey, the majority of this money went to campus upgrades. Look how much actually went to kids, students, and college ministry. More than that, if 4.75 went to campus upgrades, why did only 79,000 go to local outreach? Why did total basically under $1 million? Why did total under $1 million go to missions and local outreach if we had all these other things going, right? So again, it's just deceptive. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about deceptive annual reports, financial reports, especially with this new one. It's all of these great numbers, clap, 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 get excited, but it doesn't actually give what a financial report is supposed to give you. So that's a red flag. So let's look at, do they have a 90-day tithe challenge? I have looked. I have not seen, again, we looked at giving a minute ago. I did not see a 90-day tithe challenge. Haven't seen anything about that. So that's a green flag. No 90-day tithe challenge at all. Do they use compulsory tithing language? Let's look at online giving. The generosity of the church helps create more opportunities for people to experience life change. Your faithful giving, you make an eternal impact. That's not compulsory tithe language. All right, ways to give. It's looking good so far. Financial giving through the church is done in two ways, tithes and offerings. The Bible teaches that we worship the Lord by bringing him our tithe, which is 10% of our income. When we give in addition to our tithe, it's called an offering. God tells us to be a cheerful giver. That's close. It's on the line. The way they present it, though, the Bible teaches we worship the Lord by bringing him our tithe, which is 10% of our income. That's not what the Bible teaches, because the tithe was never 10% of your income. That's right on the line of whether I would say it's kind of compulsory tithe language or it is. But if you compare this with their generosity teaching, it seems to be, when you listen to those messages, which again are publicly available, we're not going to listen to them here, there is compulsory tithing language. Okay, so that's going to be a red flag, although it's not nearly as bad as it could be. Do they have miracle and legacy offerings, right? So let's go to messages. Again, it looks like their most recent message and series is Legacy 25. Legacy offerings is what a lot of churches use. If you look back at our miracle offering video, you're going to see that legacy offerings is one of the most used names for these kind of offerings. So that is a bit concerning. And when you go back and you look at it, let's see if they've done this before, though. Let's look at a video from this past week's message in this series and see what Jerry actually has to say about this series and what he's teaching. Let's listen in.
So where is this church going? In 2025, we're going to focus on reaching the next generation. That's going to be our focus. We've got 350 orphans that we want to give a new house to. They're living in an awful place, a little community called Kinyamaseki, Uganda. We want to build Daystar Village. In fact, it's already starting, but it's going to take a lot of generosity. We've seen our student ministry in North Alabama grow. I'm so proud of our student ministry, but they need support. They need stuff. They need activities. We're going to support them in 2025. Somebody say amen.
So if you're listening so far, this message series is all about the support and generosity they need.
Everybody cheer for Hartzell right now. Come on, everybody in Hartzell's going crazy.
All right, cue the piano for the emotional manipulation. I hate that. Anytime you hear in a message where they've not been doing that, you got somebody who's just playing the piano and stuff like that behind a pastor when they get excited and they ask you to clap. That's a form of emotional manipulation. It's not something we're looking at here, but that's kind of a red flag in and of itself. Something to really, really watch for.
Built in the next few months, we got to remodel the existing building for a next gen, for kids and students, and that's going to take a lot of generosity. You know, we have so much that we can do to reach the next generation.
All right, so as Jerry's talking about it, he says, hey, there is a lot that we're going to ask you to be generous about. Let's listen to one more video toward the end of the message and hear again what he has to say about this. We're trying to see if this is that miracle offering series.
Pioneer and perfecter of our faith. You know what? Nobody in here feels like they're rich. I get that, you know. Gallup poll did a survey and asked everybody who they think's rich, and everybody thought whoever makes twice as much as them is rich. Everybody said that. They asked people who made $50,000, they said people who make $100,000 are rich. They asked people who made $100,000, they said people who make $200,000 are rich. They asked people who subscribe to Money Magazine, what does it take to be rich? They said $5 million. And they found out that the average reader of Money Magazine makes $2.5 million, has $2.5 million. On an unrelated note, if you subscribe to that magazine, I need to see you in the lobby right after. Building an orphanage you might want to help with.
And that's just that's a funny little joke, but it's also it's part of what this series is about. It's part of what this series is about, trying to get people to loosen their pockets who have money. And again, there's nothing wrong with the ministry asking for money, but do you hear this? It seems like that's what this series is about. That's one of those markers of Miracle Offering series.
Now, a point is a moving target. You're never going to look at it and say, well, I'm the guy that's got to make this stuff happen. But I want to leave you with this statement right here. I want you to let this sink in. God's more interested in your progress than your position. It's really not where am I right now, but it's where am I going. This church is about community transformation, okay? And really it comes from this statement. We're all being what? Transformed in the image of God. From glory to glory to glory. In this series, I want to unashamedly challenge us to be better stewards of God's resources. I'm going to challenge you to think about your schedule, about your budget, about things like that. And I'm going to do some biblical management teaching that we don't do in church, but it's right there in the Bible. We don't do it enough. And it's going to help you with your finances. But I'm going to unashamedly challenge you to be more generous to help us reach the next generation with the gospel of Jesus.
So that sounds great. It sounds fantastic. He says, hey, we're going to help you. This is going to help your finances, everything else. But this is an end of the year series. It's going to help you. You're going to be blessed through it. But this whole series is just about giving people to give at the end of the year. So it would qualify as what I would call a miracle offering. Now, is it just one time? If it's just one time, that's different than if it's something they've done a lot. So let's look at their messages and let's just see, have they done this before? So we know they're doing one this year that would probably qualify as a miracle offering. Look right here. 11 months ago, they had their annual report. Okay. Their video. Let me see. Yep. A year ago, they had their annual report video. I don't necessarily see a message series around it, though. So maybe Maybe it didn't. So let's go back. Let's look at the year before. Again, just to get an idea, a lot of these message series, you can see what a church's history has been and what they have done in the past. So let's go ahead. We're trying to find the November before, because October, November, December is when the majority of these miracle offerings happen. Okay, now let's look 2 years ago. Do you see this? From a moment to a movement, moment to a movement, moment to a movement. That was a part of, if you look at their old legacy report and you look at the letter, together, we've proven our strength and resiliency, bearing the burden to reach the lost, and unwavering determination and commitment through this movement God has called us. We invite you to join the heartfelt celebration of an extraordinary journey, a journey from a fleeting moment to an enduring movement. Sounds so special. That's special me language, by the way. We're going to go ahead and mark down a red flag for that. That began with a visionary goal of 5 million and has unfolded over the past 3 years. So, it is with profound gratitude that we acknowledge your pivotal role in this remarkable achievement of the Move journey. So the Move journey was actually a 3-year kind of capital campaign, and every year around the same time, they were talking about it from moment to movement, right? So yes, they've had a series around giving every single year. That would qualify just from first glance like a miracle offering, especially with that $5 million goal. But let's see if they did it again. They did it 1 year. They didn't do it the other year. They did it the next year. So let's see. I'm trying to go back for another year and get a good idea. This would be, I believe, 3 years ago. It's really hard to kind of tell where they're at. All right, here you go. 3 years ago, you have again from a moment to a movement, from a moment to a movement. So let's go ahead and check this
Today, don't you get
and let's see when this was. 3 years ago, it was November 16th, okay? November 16th. So let's go back. Let's see. We know this one's in November. Let's look at that second moment to a movement set of messages that we looked at, and let's see exactly kind of what day it was on. Was it in kind of that November, space? All right, a year ago, I missed this. A year ago, they did have an annual report Sunday, and they had a moving forward message again. So it was movement. So they did have it then. Let's see when it was. It says a year ago, November 6th. So that's 2 in November. Let's keep looking. Let's go to 2 years ago and see if we can find this. 2 years ago, we're trying to find around Christmas. For a moment to a movement, let's look there 2 years ago, and let's see exactly what the date was, November 8th. So this is for 3 years. Every single year they've had that giving series around some sort of campaign. Let's look for the very last one that would have been 3 years ago, from a moment to a movement right here.
Don't you get your Bibles out?
Let's see when it was, November 16th. So again, we can look at 4 years. Every single year they do this. They have a giving series around some sort of big campaign. They've just changed it from the Move journey to now a legacy report, which is a big red flag that it is most likely going to be a miracle offering, and it's the first thing that you see on their website. So for miracle offerings, I'm going to go ahead and say that is a red flag for the past 4 years. Let me see, deceptive annual report. So yeah, so under finances, those are all red flags except for the 90-day tithe challenge, which was a green flag. Let's look at systems real quick, and we'll just kind of see where they're at on that. We've already seen that they have a college. That's one of the systems we look at, so red flag there. One of the other things, and again, this is one that it's not necessarily bad by itself, but Freedom with the ARC Church of the Highlands logo. This is the ARC Freedom curriculum, 100%. If you look that up with that logo, they're using that. So that's going to be a connection to ARC that is a red flag. Going to give a green flag for Kingdom Builders. And all of the giving stuff we've looked at so far, I haven't seen anything about Kingdom Builders We did again have the red flag for the college. Let's look to see if they have a serve day. All right, so if we head on over to Instagram, it looks like, yes, Serve Day 2024. They just had one, and he actually mentioned that in the message that we were playing a little bit earlier. One of the things that he mentioned at one point was he said, hey, we've served, if we go back to, let me see, let's go back to the legacy report. It gives numbers of who they have served. So let's get down here. Hours served, 3,293. It was one of the things he had people clap about, which is really cool. 3,293 serve hours. That is a lot, but remember what was their average attendance? 3,014 people. So if you take 3,014 people and then you look at hours served, it's basically on average, every person who attends Daystar served 1 hour out of that year. So this goes back to the deceptiveness of these kind of annual reports. Of course, nobody's going to say that 3,000 plus hours served is not a big deal, but it tells a different story when you realize each person's serving about 1 hour throughout the entire year, right? But at the end of the day, we're looking for serve day. Do they have a serve day? And yes, they do. Now, why does that matter again? Well, when you start looking at their systems, they have the 21-day fast, okay? They have serve day, and if we're going to the 21-day fast, I don't think we even actually talked about it. Let's go to their messages here. Let me see if I can find where the 21-day fast would have been. All right, so here we go. Under their playlist, this is where I found out that they had the 21-day fast. Because you come down here, you see 21 days of prayer and fasting, January 2023. So they have done this before. So why is this important? We start looking at all these systems together again. 1 red flag, 2 red flags, not a big deal. But in one section, like these systems, okay, there's a 21-day fast, there's a serve day, there's a college, there's freedom, and then the last question is their growth track. Now, if you look on their website, you are not going to see growth track anywhere up top with Daystar. If we go to the bottom, you're not going to see growth track, but what are you going to see? Okay, this is another name that we're going to look for that is very similar. They're not all the same. Just because a church has next steps doesn't mean that it's like this, but let's look at next steps right here for Daystar. Take your next step. We can't wait to see you after the Sunday service. At Next Steps, you're going to be able to discover your gifts and passions and how you can use those to get involved and serve on the Dream Team. So again, that's going to be a red flag for the volunteers on Dream Team. That's another one of those ARC systems, ARC monitors or monikers where they call their volunteers the Dream Team, and it sets up for some really manipulation that's not really easy to see. But again, this is present in a lot of abusive environments, okay? We're not trying to make a mountain out of a molehill, but these systems tend to be there, right? We have amazing leaders who are going to walk alongside of you during this process to help connect you to where you're going to serve. Here's the thing, though, right? If we go back to 24 to Double, remember the nonprofit that Jerry Lawson is the CEO of. Let's go to resources. All right, so when we click on resources and we scroll down, we're going to find next steps. Let's click free access here. And when we start looking through next steps, I'm not going to go through the details here because we'll be here for a while. But we went through this entire book, and this book is very, very similar, probably 80% the same as Growth Track. This is Growth Track. Whether they call it Growth Track or not, look at it. Our spiritual journey consists of 4 steps. Know God, find freedom, discover your purpose, make a difference. That is the Highlands, the ARC model. Know God, find freedom, discover purpose, make a difference. Look up on ARC's website, on the Highlands website. That is there almost verbatim in the Growth Track book, right? It's these 4 steps that they're walking through. When you look at a lot of these different things, we serve, we give, what are your next steps? All of those are a part of Growth Track, serving on the Dream Team. And when you start walking through them, giving you the different places that you can serve, part of Growth Track. Using Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, stuff like that, it's a part of Growth Track. So when you look through this booklet, the truth is Next Steps is just a different name for Growth Track. And we see this with a lot of churches. But when we ask the question, let's look at their systems. They use Growth Track. They use a 21-day fast. They use Serve Day. They do Freedom. They have a college. The only green flag there was Kingdom Builders, which tells me all the rest of them are red flags. This church, even though if we go to the ARC website, we're not going to find them on the Church Finder. So even though they're not technically a part of ARC, they have the fingerprints of ARC all over them. And these troubling systems, they are still using. So again, under systems, it's all red flags except for one, and that was Kingdom Builders. If we look at narcissism, there's a couple of things that we have already looked at, right? We looked at under the financial report, the special me language. That was a red flag of talking about them being a movement, and it was so much more than a moment. And it just, that kind of language paints this church to be something really special, okay? And again, it might seem like something small. It's a red flag with the special me language. Looking at a couple of things we got green flags on, Daystar doesn't seem to have a podcast of any kind that's aimed outside. They don't seem to have a music label or anything like that that is aimed outside. Also, let's look at their mission statement. Let's go to About Us. Let's look through Daystar. Church exists to see community transformation through the love and power of Jesus Christ. That is not a regurgitated mission statement. So again, they don't have a podcast and music that's aimed outside of their church. They don't have a music label. They don't have a regurgitated mission statement. So that's 3 green flags, which I'm grateful to see. Franchise campuses. Do they have franchise campuses? And yes, they do. From everything I can understand, it looks like they're streaming from, again, I could be wrong on this, but it looks like they're streaming Pastor Jerry to all these campuses. They have the Cullman, the Hartzell, the Madison, and they're all going to be kind of ran like franchise campuses. So that is a bit of a red flag. Toxic honor language is a green flag. I haven't seen any of that toxic honor language. I'm not even going to rate. I'm not going to rate at all the unity language. I haven't seen quite anything. So I guess we could call that a green flag. Let's go ahead and green flag that. But under the narcissism part, it's a mixture of green flags and red flags. One of the things that we haven't talked about in narcissism is plagiarized sermons. So I want to talk about that real quick. Now, when I go to Daystar's messages, okay, we go over to the YouTube channel. We're looking at their messages. I'm not seeing a lot here that makes me feel like there is a lot of plagiarized stuff, right? So it looks really good at first glance. I will say Influencer Sunday looks a lot like a Rising Communicators type weekend. That comes from, again, Arc Systems and Highlands. I wouldn't call that plagiarism, but it is at least something to pay attention to. But again, I don't see a whole lot there. Just continuing to look through this, seeing if there's anything that sticks out. I am not seeing a lot right now. Yeah, so I don't really see anything on their messages, but I will tell you where this becomes a little bit of a concern. So if we go back to the 24 to Double website, here's what we're going to find. We look at resources again, and we're going to see one, Daystar at the Movies, Summer Sample. At the Movies is the same kind of series that Life Church and a lot of other churches use. Again, though, it's not plagiarism, but it is one of those things. Are we seeing, messages that other churches would use? So I didn't see that before, but I saw it on 24 to Double. Here's where the concern about plagiarism comes in, though. And if you want to hear more about it, I actually talked to Jerry about it in the first podcast that we did. But if you look at the 24 to Double homepage, if you buy a membership to 24 to Double, one of the things that you get, I'm going to come over here, I'm going to pull it down. One of the things you get is a bonus. It's Sermons 365, 1 full year of sermons. All right, 1 full year of sermons. This year's worth of messages is a shortcut to free up your schedule, make space for implementing 24 to Double. You're able to use these pre-written messages as a starting point for sermon development, or use them as written to build high-quality sermons without staring at a blank page for hours. So there's two things we're concerned about with a church plagiarizing messages. One, it is a big red flag when a church is giving someone else's messages and not giving credit for them, okay? That tells you a lot about the integrity or lack thereof in the church. Most parishioners, they expect that their pastor is going to be looking for a word from God for that particular congregation, not using someone else's messages without attribution. Plagiarism's never okay, in my opinion. But the other side is what we're looking at here with Daystar. Daystar doesn't look to be using a lot of other people's sermons as far as we can tell, but a lot of the sermons, if not all of the sermons that Jerry is preaching, they're using them as a sales point, and they're selling them to other churches and saying you can use them as written. Use them as written for your sermons. And let's go to resources, and you're going to see what I'm talking about, because Jerry said, this is just a really small amount. It's just an outline. It's just all of that. So let's come down here. Remember their Move campaign, right? They actually sell their Move campaign. These two are free. Their Giving series and their Move campaign are free sermons. You have to buy Sermons 365 to get the others, but they give these away for free so we can see a little bit about them. Let's look at the Move campaign. Let's look at week 1. There's 2 pieces. One is notes. And if you look at the notes, there is not a lot there. So it's kind of what Jerry said. You couldn't really preach a sermon off of that. That's just a starting point, okay? But what happens if we check out the full document, okay? If we check out the full document, you're going to see there's a lot more, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and tell you, because there's a lot of ad-libbing, there's a lot of explaining. This could be used. I could use this right now. And it may not seem like someone's not a communicator. I could use these 7 pages right now to preach a sermon completely unprepared, and it would sound great. Now, the other one, though, is actually going to show you a bit more here. Let's look at the Giving series, okay? Let's look at the Giving series. Let's go to Generosity Week 1. It tells you when he preached this the first time, right? Now he's selling it to others. It gives you quotes. It gives you stories. It's giving you everything, right? Here's another story. It's giving you the verses. It's giving you the 3 points. It's giving you all of it. I could preach off of this because there's so much. There's off the cuff explanation and everything else. He gives another story right here. I could preach off of this right now, and you can follow along. You can go to one of his more recent Generosity series. You can follow along with a lot of this. He just changed some of the stories up. But if we could go back and look, we don't have access to it. It's not on their YouTube channel. But if we went back to March 13th, 2010, we'd be able to see all of this stuff, okay? So it's going to be a red flag for plagiarism, because if you're okay selling sermons, you're going to be okay buying sermons as well. But it tells us about the integrity of a church. And again, Jerry and I will go round and round on this. He doesn't see any problem with plagiarism. We don't think plagiarism is ever okay. And out of the churches we've seen that think plagiarism is okay, it has been a mainstay staple of spiritually abusive environments. So again, if you're saying, hey, is this a safe church? I don't know. But that's something we would say, hey, that's going to be hard for us to recommend this church if they think plagiarism is okay. So that's going to be a red flag. But in the narcissism area, we're basically looking at 4 red flags and 4 green flags. So it's about half and half. Volunteers-wise, do they use the Dream Team moniker? Yes, that is a red flag. Green flag, we didn't see a membership covenant. Red flag, yes, they use their purpose language and next steps, Dream Team, and all of that. Let's also look at serving. How are their serving opportunities? Okay, are these insular serving opportunities? Well, let's go ahead. Let's go to next steps, and we're going to go back and download this. We're going to see what the serving opportunities look like. Let's go to 24 to double, because that's where we actually get to see the next steps booklet. This is going to have all of their serving opportunities, which weren't as easy to find on the website. So let's go ahead. I'm going to scroll down. And we're going to see if these are more insular serving opportunities, outside, or a little bit of both. So local outreach, community events team, disaster relief, that's outside. That's pretty cool. First impressions, Daystar Kids Ministry, Daystar Students Prayer Team, Next Steps Team, Worship Team, Production Team, Creative Team, Small Groups, A Team, Setup, Teardown, Events Team. So all but local outreach is going to be insular serving opportunities. So again, it's not bad. It could be worse. That's still going to fit as a red flag on that for us, though, because it is so insular. And some of the outreach opportunities are actually, and that's the hard part with churches like this. You have to look at the outreach opportunities. A lot of them are they're almost PR events more than they are missional community type things. So I would like to see a little bit more insular or a little bit more community focused opportunities on the dream team there. And then required tithing to be a volunteer. If you look through the Next Steps booklet as well, you're going to see that they are required to tithe to be a volunteer. Let's look at affiliations. Are they affiliated with ARC? Because again, when you look back at volunteers, I think it was 4 out of 5 red flags, 1 green flag. Affiliations, they're not technically affiliated with ARC, but they run almost all of the ARC systems. The Next Steps book is basically Growth Track. I'm going to give that a yellow flag because they're not technically an ARC church. They're not giving to ARC as far as I can tell, but they are a part of ARC. Let's look at guest speakers. Do they have any guest speakers that would be a concern? For the most part, like First Baptist Tifton, it looks like Daystar, Jerry's preaching most of the time, Pastor Jaron Potter, to Hell and Back, Andrew Blaylock. It looks like a lot of these people are people who are possibly a part of the church. They're not anybody that I would know that would give me concerns. Ben Murray, kind of the same thing. They're Influencer Sunday. So as I'm looking through this, I don't see any guest speakers that would give me concern. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to give them a green flag on that one. I don't see them being a part of the EFCA or the ECFA. That's a green flag. They're not a part of the SBC as far as we can tell, so that will be a green flag as well. So mainly green flags. 3 out of 4 green flags, 1 yellow flag, no red flags on affiliation, so that's a really good spot for them. So let's look at these last 2, business operations and pastoral care. Business operations, this is a great spot for them. It's all 3 green flags. So I don't see any non-resource merch. I don't see at all where there's a place where you could buy merch. They're not trying to sell you stuff. They're not trying to make a big deal out of that. They're not selling you coffee. There's no music production label. So all of those are going to be green flags. Great job there. Staff to attendance ratio, this one's a little hard because, again, they don't clearly show their staff. Out of the staff we can count that's either listed on the website somewhere or named, like Jason Zenmeister was named for 24 to double. So we're going to take everybody that we see named or on the website. I counted 18. I could be off by 1 or 2, but I counted 18. There's probably more, okay? I got to be honest about this. There's probably more. But out of what we can see, I got 18. We saw that there were 3,014 in weekly attendance in the U.S. So let's go ahead. Let's do a little bit of math. 3,014. Let's divide that by 18 staff. That would be 1 staff for every 165 people. So I'm going to give them a red flag based on what's available, although that could be more of a yellow flag or even a green flag if we had access to their full staff. They may have a better staffing ratio than this, but as far as what we know, it's over that 1 to 100 mark, which is going to be a red flag for staff to attender ratio for us. And then their care process, I'm going to say it's a yellow flag. Okay. They do serve projects. Okay. They have benevolence. They give to benevolence. We can come down here. We can click on benevolence. They have their contact forms. They do the Choose Life ministry, which is a fantastic ministry. They have serve projects where you can request assistance. So I think all of that is really cool. They have a crisis prevention, section, but it just points you toward like the suicide prevention hotline. They do have some biblical coaching. I'm not sure exactly what that is. It's definitely not counseling, but they say they're not professional counseling. But they do offer that. So there's a lot of stuff here, okay? And they do have licensed counseling recommendations, okay, that they provide. So there's some good stuff there. It all seems kind of like outside. So I don't see like how people are cared for regularly. So definitely not a red flag though. There's a lot of good stuff there. I'm going to give it a yellow flag. Just because there's still a lot of questions that I would have. I would just ask about their care process. My guess from conversations with Jerry is they're going to run a lot of that through their small group. So I'd ask a lot of questions if I was attending Daystar. Hey, so what does that look like? If I was to have a crisis, what would that look like? How would I get that pastoral care? Is there a way for me to reach out to a pastor I know? So again, yellow flag's not bad. It just means there's a question. But all in all, looking at all of this, there were 12 green flags, okay? So there's definitely good, clear stuff here. 12 green flags out of 43. I count 7 yellow flags out of 43, so that's 18 like good or just questions. The downside is there's 23 out of 43 red flags. So if we're looking at the ratio, that's 12 green flags to 30 red or yellow flags, and out of that 30, it's predominantly red. So if I had to look at Daystar, right, First Baptist Tifton, we looked at them, and I said, you know what? We would have to give First Baptist Church Tifton a green flag, and if we had someone asking, hey, does this look like a safe place to go, we'd recommend it. With Daystar, we're going to have to go the other way, okay? And again, there's so much good happening at Daystar. I can't tell you if they're not, I can't tell you they're not safe. I can't tell you they're dangerous. They could be a great, fantastic, healthy church. But with that ratio of 30 red or yellow flags to 12 green flags, as far as what we look at, I would have to say, if you've been through severe spiritual abuse or church hurt and you're wondering, is this a safe place for me to go? I just can't in good conscience recommend, yes, that looks like a safe place to go. Now, it may be, and feel free to go there if you feel like God is calling you to go there. You're armed with this. You got a lot of questions you can ask about the yellow flags and the red flags. You can get more information, okay? But if you're not sure and you just want to be extra safe, you don't feel comfortable asking those questions, it's probably not a good place for you to go if you're still dealing with the effects of religious trauma. I want to finish out the same way, though. Major concerns and questions, minor concerns and questions, and what are the biggest positives, finishing out on a high note, because there are a lot of positives with Daystar. And like I said, people that I know have always said really good things about it. Here are my major concerns, okay? Financial transparency, that's probably the biggest concern that I have, period. They are not financially transparent at all. There's a whole lot that they're not saying. I have no idea what they're doing with the finances. And because finances is such a big area that attaches itself to spiritual abuse, I would like to see a ton more financial transparency and for them to follow the lead of churches like First Baptist Church Tifton. Governance is just as big. Those two things are the first two things we look at. They're the biggest things we look at. And there's no information about their governance. I have no idea what the accountability looks like for Jerry Lawson. No idea what the reporting process looks like if there's sin or scandal. I have no idea, about any of that. Do they have elders? What does that look like? I know he said in a message they have a board of directors, but you have to on paper as a 501c3. How are they chosen? Are they independent? I don't know. And those are the two biggest concerns because they're the first things we look at, okay? If a church is not financially transparent and they don't have solid, clear governance that's publicly published, it's hard for me to ever recommend them personally. So those are my biggest concerns. Some other major concerns, though. There seem to be a lot of narcissistic systems, narcissistic language within the organization. They're tied to a whole lot of ARC systems. That's a big set of red flags for me. The fact that they seem to be so okay with promoting plagiarism is a huge deal for me. And then the 24 to double conflicts. The conflict with that, what is the church taking care of? What is it, what does the relationship look like there? That's a bit concerning. I would have a lot of questions there. Some minor concerns. These are just things I would ask questions about. They're not huge concerns. I would have some questions just about pastoral care. This may actually be really good. It may not. I wouldn't ask questions and take a simple answer like, oh, it happens through small groups. I would ask deeper questions. What does that look like? If I was going through a divorce, what would that look like through small groups? If I was, somebody close to me in my family was diagnosed with a terminal illness, what would that look like? I need someone to do a funeral. What would that look like? because small group leaders normally aren't going to be able to do weddings and funerals, stuff like that. So it's just worth asking questions, kind of a minor concern there. And then the biggest positives, and some really cool stuff there. The Choose Life ministry that Daystar does, where they're not just a church that says, hey, we're anti-abortion. They said, hey, we have a whole ministry designed to come alongside of women who are in crisis pregnancy, and to come alongside potential parents. It's a really cool ministry they have. I'm really glad they're putting their money where the mouth is there. It's fantastic. Great job, Daystar. Their crisis prevention page, where they're saying, hey, suicide hotline, we have some coaching here. Here's the number you could text. That was very helpful. I know that it looks like they've got a really big focus on small groups, and Jerry talked about that in our podcast episodes. I think the small groups and community opportunities are really big. So those would be my biggest positives that I would be really excited about. And again, there's a lot of good stuff going on at Daystar. There's 3,000 people going a week. So obviously there's some good things going on there. But if you look at these two churches, First Baptist Church Tifton and you look at Daystar, they're both similar in size. They're large churches, they're mega churches, but they're not they're not giga churches. They're not these huge churches. But you look at these two mega churches, there's a very marked difference between how transparent one is with finances and how not transparent the other is. There's a major difference in how clearly one shares all of their governance and accountability and the other one does not. There's a clear difference in narcissistic systems and ARC systems. So this is a really good dichotomy to show you of two mega churches that are right on that line of being mega churches, to say, hey, what does one look like that has more green flags and tends to look a bit more like a safe church where I could re-engage? And what does one look like that tends to have more red and yellow flags that might not be a good place for me to re-engage with church for the first time after spiritual abuse or religious trauma? Again, though, you can go to either one of these churches, and as long as you feel safe, feel free to go. Hopefully this gives you some questions to ask, some intentional questions to ask. But just by looking at two churches' websites, their social media, their YouTube page, we've been able to find out a lot of information. So these are questions you can ask. These are red flags, yellow flags, green flags that you can look for. And at the end of the day, the data kind of speaks for itself if you're not sure what to do. If we have a church that has significantly more green flags than red flags, we're going to say, hey, we recommend this probably a pretty safe church. Be careful, but go ahead and engage and ask those questions. If it's the opposite, has a lot more red flags, we're going to say, hey, be careful, slow down. That may not be the best spot for you. Because again, if you've been through religious trauma, going through it again, that trauma can stack. So we just want you to be able to be careful. Again, these are the first red flag reviews we're going to do. We're going to be doing a whole lot more. I'm going to be doing some in my own city. We're going to be doing these in cities all across the country. A lot of times, these red flag reviews are going to be one church, just one church at a time. Sometimes we will do a dichotomy, two similar churches, like we did this time. But if you have any questions, let us know in the comments below, or you can contact us via the SAI website. Also, if you go to either of these two churches and you want to give us information that maybe we missed or that wasn't publicly available, but you could give it to us, we'd be more than happy to look at it and publish an update. So anybody from Daystar or First Baptist Church Tifton, if you want us to publish an update, we absolutely will do that. But keep in mind, all we're looking at here, we're looking at what's easily publicly accessible, because that's what you as a potential attender is going to be looking at. But again, what questions do you have? Let us know in the comments below. What did we miss? What red flags, yellow flags, green flags should we be looking for? Because we're always learning. Let us know. As well, pray for us, because in the new year, SAI is going to be doing church safe assessments as well as a church safe pledge with churches. And both of those programs are going to allow us to do work hands-on with churches, and it's going to allow us to go way deeper, significantly deeper than we can look at through a red flag review, so that we can help churches become safe, and so that we can help bring accountability to churches so you can feel more comfortable when you go to a church that they're doing everything possible to make sure that you are safe, that you are cared for. So pray for that. Pray for wisdom. Pray for the right opportunities as we begin to connect with churches, because, guys, we want to be able to point you towards safe, life-giving churches, and we want to know that there's accountability in place that even we can follow up on if something goes awry. So I pray for that, because the red flag reviews, these are just scratching the surface of the ministry that we hope to be able to do in the next year. But again, let us know if you think we missed anything. Let us know about any of these questions. I hope this first red flag review was helpful to you. In the future, these are going to go a lot faster because we're going to be able to point people back toward this episode where they can learn how we do red flag reviews, why we do red flag reviews, and what a lot of these things mean. But we'll be back, and I'm going to try to start doing these at least a couple of times a month, if not sometimes every week. So if you got a church that you want to check out, you want us to do a red flag review on, again, go to the contact form on the website or let us know in the comments below, because we would love to get your recommendations as well and look at as many churches as we can for you guys. And we're grateful even for both of these churches, whether it becomes a kind of a red flag church or more of a green flag church. We're grateful to be able to look at these churches, and we know that even when they might not be as safe of a church as we'd like, even when bad things go on, there's always good things that go on at churches too. Our goal, though, is to help you be protected, to help you feel safe, and to help you re-engage with church in a safe way. So that's it for today's episode. We'll be back next week with a more normal episode. Next week is going to be our interview with Scott McKnight, the author of the new book, Invisible Jesus. And guys, that is an incredible book. One of the best books I have read in a while. If you've been through spiritual abuse, you've experienced deep church hurt, or you're in the middle of deconstruction, or even if you're just a pastor who wants to know how to better minister to your people, that book is absolutely transformational. We got our interview with Scott McKnight next week, which was fantastic. You do not want to miss it. And then here in a couple of weeks, we've got planned an interview with Tommy Preeson Phillips, who is the other co-author of that book. So we can't wait to share that with you. That'll be next week. But until then, grace and peace. I'll see you on the next episode of the Church Disrupted podcast.